The night was colder than usual, the kind that sank deep into bones and made the world feel older than it was. The plains stretched out endless and silent beneath a silver moon, and the only sound came from the wind whispering through dry grass. Evelyn Carter sat near the fireplace, her boots off, her body aching from another long day of work that had no end in sight. The ranch had once been full of noise, of horses neighing, of her daughter's laughter, but now the quiet had become her closest companion. 50 years old, gray threading through her dark hair, Evelyn had learned to find peace in loneliness, though sometimes that peace hurt more than the noise ever had. The flames crackled in front of her, throwing golden light against the walls of the small ranch house. She lifted a chipped mug of coffee to her lips, but the bitterness didn't reach her taste anymore. Every sip reminded her how long it had been since life had given her something sweet. The photos on the mantel stared back at her. Her husband Tom with his broad smile, her little girl at 5 years old sitting on his lap. Both gone now, one to the earth and one to the city that had swallowed her whole. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat and told herself that tonight would be just like every other. She'd finish her coffee, feed the fire, and fall asleep to the sound of the wind. But that night was different. A storm was rolling in from the west. Clouds heavy and dark, the kind that made the horizon disappear. She could feel it in her knees before she saw it. The ranch had been quiet all day, the animals restless, the air charged with tension. Evelyn stood and walked to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. The first drops of rain splattered against it like impatient fingers. She sighed, pulling her coat off the hook and heading for the barn. The horses didn't like storms, and she couldn't sleep knowing they were scared. The moment she opened the door, the wind hit her full in the face, cold and sharp. The rain came faster now, and thunder rolled like distant cannon fire. She ran, her boots sinking into the mud, her coat flapping wildly. Inside the barn, the horses stamped and snorted, eyes wide with fear. Evelyn moved quickly, whispering to them the way she used to whisper to her daughter when the girl had nightmares. Her hands moved over their manes, calming them, but one of the younger horses kicked out, panic surging through its muscles. Evelyn tried to steady it, but her foot slipped on the wet straw. The world spun and she hit the ground hard. Pain shot up her ankle, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. "Miss Carter!" A voice called from outside, barely audible over the storm. She turned her head, blinking through the rain, and saw Luke Tanner running toward her. His hat was gone, his shirt clinging to his chest, and water streamed down his face. In the flickering light, he looked almost unreal, like someone pulled straight from a memory she didn't know she had. He reached her in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice firm but filled with concern. Evelyn tried to stand, but pain flared again. "My ankle," she muttered. "It's twisted." Without hesitation, Luke slid an arm beneath her knees and another around her back. "Hold on," she wanted to protest, wanted to tell him she could walk. But the words caught in her throat as he lifted her effortlessly. The heat of his body cut through the cold rain, and her pulse quickened in a way she hadn't felt in years. He carried her out of the barn, his step steady despite the slippery ground. She could hear his breath, quick but strong, the kind of sound that made her aware of just how close they were. Inside the house, he set her down gently on the old couch near the fire. The warmth wrapped around her immediately, but it did nothing to quiet the rush in her chest. Luke crouched in front of her, taking her foot carefully into his hands. His fingers were rough, the skin darkened from sun and work, but his touch was gentle. "I'll take care of it," he said softly. "Looks like a sprain." "Nothing too bad." Evelyn stared at him, her lips parting to speak, but no words came. She wanted to say thank you, to make some small joke to ease the tension, but she couldn't. She hadn't been this close to anyone in years, not like this, not where she could feel every breath between them. He wrapped her ankle with a cloth he found on the table, then looked up, his eyes meeting hers. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the scar near his jaw, the softness in his expression that didn't belong to a man his age. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said finally, her voice lower than she meant it to be. There's a blanket by the stove. He nodded, standing, but before he turned, he hesitated. I'll sleep in the barn after I get you settled. Storm like this, I don't want to leave the animals. She wanted to say yes, to let him go, but something deep inside her, something she thought had died long ago, rose to the surface. The sound of the rain outside, the flicker of firelight, the loneliness that clung to every corner of her home, it all pressed against her heart at once. Stay, she said quietly. Just stay here tonight. Luke froze, then gave a small nod. All right. He sat across from her, the fire crackling between them. For a while, neither spoke. The storm raged on outside, but inside, the world felt small and safe. Evelyn leaned back, watching the flames, her body relaxing despite herself. Luke was the first to break the silence. You built all this yourself? She smiled faintly. Tom and I bought it 30 years ago. After he passed, I ran it alone. It's not much, but it's home. He nodded slowly, eyes tracing the worn wood and faded curtains. It's more than most have. My pa lost our place when I was 16. After that, I just drifted. Evelyn listened, her chest tightening at the way his voice caught when he spoke of his past. He told her about working ranches across Texas and Colorado, about sleeping under stars and eating whatever he could catch. He laughed when he mentioned his first broken rib from a wild horse. His stories were rough around the edges, but honest. When he finished, Evelyn found herself speaking, too, about her husband's accident, about how her daughter had moved to the city and rarely wrote, about the nights she thought the loneliness would swallow her whole. By the time the clock struck midnight, the storm had softened into a steady drizzle. They sat in silence again, but it was no longer awkward. It was a silence that felt shared, almost intimate. Evelyn noticed the way the firelight reflected in his eyes, the way his smile lingered when he looked at her. When she tried to stand to fetch more wood, pain shot through her ankle again. Luke was beside her before she could fall. His hand caught her arm, steadying her, and for a long moment they stood close. Too close. She could feel his breath warm against her cheek. Her heart raced. I shouldn't, she whispered, her voice shaking. I'm too old for this. Luke didn't step back. His gaze softened. Maybe age doesn't matter as much as you think. Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to steady herself, but the truth was, something inside her had already changed. The walls she'd built around her heart for years had started to crumble, piece by piece, under the warmth of a young man's kindness. And as the last rumble of thunder faded into the distance, she realized this storm had brought more than rain. It had brought a feeling she thought she'd buried forever. The morning sun came slow and soft, breaking through the gray sky in thin golden streaks that crept across the floorboards. Evelyn woke before the rooster crowed, the faint ache in her ankle reminding her that the storm and everything it brought had been real. She lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle crackle of dying embers in the fireplace and the steady rhythm of breathing from the couch nearby. Luke was still there, stretched out under an old wool blanket, his hat resting over his chest. The sight of him, peaceful, so sure even in sleep, brought a warmth to her chest she didn't know how to name. It had been years since she had shared her home with another soul. Years since she'd felt the air thick with something other than silence. She sat up quietly, careful not to wake him, and moved to the kitchen. The wooden floor creaked under her bare feet as she poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. The familiar sounds of morning surrounded her, the faint hiss of the flame, the ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind against the windows. Everything was as it always had been, yet it all felt different now. When Luke stirred awake, blinking against the soft light, she turned just in time to see him smile. It was the kind of smile that seemed to disarm everything, the past, the pain, the fear. He stretched, ran a hand through his messy hair, and said in a low voice, "Smells like coffee." Evelyn smiled back, though she tried to keep it small. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "After a night like that, coffee's about as close to heaven as I'll get." They shared breakfast at the small kitchen table, biscuits from the night before, and a pot of strong coffee. Luke told her about the storm, how he'd checked on the horses after she fell asleep, how one of the fences had given way but the herd had stayed calm. He spoke with such quiet confidence that she couldn't help admiring him. For someone so young, he carried himself like an old soul, steady, kind, sure of who he was even when the world wasn't sure of him. After breakfast, Evelyn tried to send him home to rest, but he refused. "You've got a bad ankle and there's work to be done. I'll stay till you're back on your feet," he said simply, and that was that.